Everyone in the jewelry shop was left astonished when Clint Eastwood, accompanied by his security team, suddenly entered. He then told the saleswoman that he was looking for something special as a gift. During this time, Clint's gaze briefly fell on David, which left David completely awestruck. David was the kind of boy who noticed things others overlooked. At just 9 years old, he understood the weight his mother carried working long hours as a nurse in Madison, Wisconsin. She always came home with tired eyes but a smile reserved just for him. She would say, "David, no matter how hard the day, seeing you makes it all worth it." Her words were her armor, but David knew the sacrifices she made every single day. So, when her birthday was just a week away, David decided he wasn't going to make her another card or pick wildflowers from the park like he had done before. This year, he wanted to give her something special, something that would make her feel as valued as she made him feel every day. But special things weren't free, and David didn't have much. For months, he had been collecting coins from anywhere he could. He shoveled snow from driveways in the winter and helped neighbors with groceries in exchange for a few nickels and dimes. He even skipped out on ice cream from the school cafeteria, tucking away the quarters his mom had given him instead. Every penny went into a glass jar hidden under his bed. When the day finally came, David emptied the jar onto his bed and counted every coin carefully. $5.72. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He poured the coins into a little pouch, grabbed his backpack, and set out on foot to the only jewelry store in town, Pearl Jewelers. The bell above the door jingled softly as David stepped inside Galleria Jewelers. The store was small but inviting, with glass display cases arranged neatly under soft yellow lights. Shelves lined the walls, showcasing sparkling necklaces, delicate bracelets, and rings that seemed far too expensive for a boy with less than $6 behind him. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Galleria, her gray hair tied in a neat bun. She greeted David with a warm smile. "Hello, young man. What can I help you with today?" David hesitated, clutching the pouch of coins in his hand. I'm looking for something for my mom. It's her birthday next week." Mrs. Galleria's smile widened. "How thoughtful. Do you have something in mind?" He shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something nice, but I don't have a lot of money." Mrs. Galleria crouched slightly to meet David's eyes. There was something about his earnestness that softened her. "Well, let's see what we can find. What's your budget?" David's cheeks flushed as he placed the pouch of coins on the counter. "This is all I have." She opened the pouch and carefully counted the coins, her hands moving slowly as if respecting the weight of his effort. $5.72, she said gently. Her expression didn't betray pity, but understanding. Scanning the cases, she pulled out a small silver charm in the shape of a heart. It wasn't flashy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. "This one is special. It's pure silver, part of our older stock. I could let you have it for what you've saved." David's face lit up. "Really? She's gonna love it." As Mrs. Galleria began wrapping the charm in a small box, the sound of tires screeching outside drew their attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. The door opened, and a tall young man stepped out, flanked by two men in dark suits. He walked with a quiet confidence that filled the space as he entered the store. It was none other than Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood's entrance changed everything. As soon as he stepped inside, the atmosphere in the store shifted. David froze, gripping the edge of the counter. The tall, confident figure walked with a quiet intensity, his sharp features immediately recognizable. Even the Gallerias, who had seen their fair share of celebrities over the years, looked momentarily taken aback. "Good afternoon," Mrs. Galleria quickly recovered. "How can we help you today?" Clint offered a polite smile, his voice calm yet commanding. "I'm looking for a gift, something elegant but meaningful." David tried to remain invisible, shrinking slightly as Clint's security detail scanned the room. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he wondered if he should leave, not wanting to get in the way. Clint glanced around the store, his eyes landing briefly on David. He gave a small nod, almost as if to acknowledge him, before turning his attention to the display cases. David couldn't help but feel starstruck. This wasn't someone he'd ever imagined he'd meet, especially not in a small jewelry store in Madison, Wisconsin. While Clint examined a case of watches, David's gaze drifted back to the little box Mrs. Galleria was wrapping. It wasn't much, but it was perfect in David's eyes. He could already picture his mom's face when she opened it. Suddenly, Clint's voice cut through David's thoughts. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing toward the box in Mrs. Galleria's hands. She hesitated, glancing at David. "It's a small charm this young man is buying for his mother's birthday." Clint's brow furrowed slightly, as if trying to piece together the situation. He looked down at David, who was still standing silently, clutching his pouch. "That's a nice gift," Clint said, his tone genuine. David managed a small nod. "I saved up for it," he said quietly, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Clint's expression softened. "For your mom?" David nodded again, this time with more confidence. "She works really hard. I wanted to get her something special." For a moment, the store fell silent. Even the security detail seemed to relax, their stern expressions easing as they listened. But what Clint did next left everyone completely speechless. Clint Eastwood turned back to the counter, his eyes lingering on the small, wrapped box. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, as if he was trying to understand more than just the boy's words. After a moment, he spoke again, addressing Mrs. Galleria. "Would you mind showing me something similar? Something understated but meaningful, like that charm?" Clint asked, pointing to the display case. Mrs. Galleria complied, carefully retrieving a small gold pendant in the shape of a star. It shimmered under the warm store lights, delicate yet radiant. Clint examined the pendant for a moment before turning back to David. "Do you think your mom would like this instead?" David blinked, unsure how to respond. "It's beautiful," he said, "but I don't have enough money for that." Clint smiled faintly and placed the pendant on the counter. "Don't worry about the price. Consider it my gift to you and your mom." David's eyes widened, disbelief washing over his face. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," Clint replied. "What you're doing for your mom, saving, working hard, wanting to make her happy, that's something special. Not everyone would go to those lengths." The room felt charged with emotion as Clint pulled out his wallet and handed his credit card to Mrs. Galleria. She hesitated for a moment, glancing between David and Clint before ringing up the purchase. David's voice trembled. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Clint crouched slightly, meeting David at eye level. "Because sometimes, when we have the chance to make someone else's life a little better, we should. Your mom sounds like an incredible person, and she deserves to know how much she means to you. And so do you." David stared at him, tears welling up in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Clint smiled again, this time with a warmth that filled the room. "You're welcome. Just make sure you give her the biggest hug when you give it to her, okay?" Mrs. Galleria handed David the box containing the gold pendant, now wrapped in a beautiful bow. David held it carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. As Clint stood to leave, he placed a hand briefly on David's shoulder. "Take care of her," he said gently. David nodded, his tears spilling over now. "I will." The Galleria exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with quiet awe. "Thank you, young man," Mr. Galleria said as Clint turned to the door. "You've reminded us all of what's important." As the door jingled behind Clint and his entourage, David looked up at Mrs. Galleria. "Is it okay if I come back here one day when I have more money?" Mrs. Galleria's eyes softened. "David, you're welcome here any time. And next time, you'll have to tell us how much your mom loved her gift." As David walked out of the store that day, holding the gift close to his chest, he didn't realize the ripple effect this one moment would have on his life and everyone who witnessed it. The afternoon sunlight felt warmer, brighter, as if the world had shifted just a little.